Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going for the second part of Charles Dickens's travelogue, Washington. So in the first part we had discussed about Dickens's visit from Philadelphia to Washington, and on the way his encounters with the settlers in America from England as well as the American people and their almost a cultural practice of tobacco chewing and spitting in the public places. And he also discussed about the outskirt of Washington, though he described the capital as a beautiful structure, but the outskirt of Washington was quite unimpressive because he told that it was actually a city of intentions than city of magnificent distances as it was designed by the Paris or the French architect. So now coming to the second part, we will find here Dickens's interaction with the senators, the President of America, and his visit to the Senate and House of Representatives and the presidential house of the President and his impressions. So here he begins by telling that by his own estimation, he says that he was never been in awe of any legislator either in England or in any part of the world he visited. So American legislators also didn't impress him as something very superior or something very extraordinary from the beginning. And he already had discussed about the two houses, and he is telling that what he wanted to find in the legislators of America, because he had come with great expectation of visiting the greatest democracy in the world at that time, and he is telling, are these legislators being expected to exhibit their intelligence, refinement, truth, honesty, patriotism? But instead of that, he came across within them many legislators with coarse threats of words and blows, such as coal heavers. So he was very much disappointed. But at the same time, he is telling that he is not that much disappointed because it is almost similar in his part of the world, in England, and he is making a comparison by telling that the legislators in England, they sometimes even go down to the set of the agrarian or farmyard imitations. And he is telling it is a good thing on the part of America that it has not imported this practice from the British Parliament. So very satirically, he is talking about the rude and coarse behavior of the legislators. And when he was very much there in the House of legislation, he found that when somebody is talking, others are behaving in a very uncivilized manner. Someone is crying, someone is making a shrill voice, or someone is distracting. But one thing he marked, that whenever the chair or the speaker speaks, everything is silent and everybody is exhibiting a great respect for the chair. And it may be Dickens's perception, because at that time in the history of America, it was a very disturbing time, which we will be discussing later on. And because of that, maybe the House of Representatives, he found so many unruly incidents, so many even indecent acts on the part of these honorable legislators. And he is calling them as the meanest perversion of virtuous political machinery that the worst tools ever wrought. He is calling in a very critical and extreme manner that they are the meanest perversion of virtuous political machinery that the worst tools ever wrought. And he is finding in them the want of honesty, patriotism, their noble oath that they had taken to further the interest of America as a new country. It is a new country, it is a new nation. And these legislators had the responsibility of leading them from a state of chaos to a discipline, towards a set goal, towards something in order. But instead of that, they themselves are immersed in such type of behavior. So that disappoints Dickens. And he is telling that, did I see in this public body an assemblies of men bound together in the sacred names of liberty and freedom, and so asserting the chaste dignity of those twin goddesses? Are these people the champions of liberty and freedom? Because America was propagated as a new nation, as a new country that champions liberty and freedom. But do these people reflect that spirit of America? And he finds that this reflection is very much not there. So he is telling that unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, which solemnly declares that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he is telling then what will happen to the great declaration of America, the declaration at the end of their freedom struggle, their freedom war under the leadership of George Washington. And this declaration was signed by the 13 states, and it was harping on, it was stressing on three things. One was inalienable rights of life, second one is liberty, and the third one is the pursuit of happiness. And he is telling, do these legislators in the House of Representatives do justice to this declaration? Are they having that consciousness of the declaration with these three goals for their own people who have elected them to this prestigious house? And his disappointment is even gets further intensified when he finds that among these people there are all scrambling, fights goes on, and they who in other countries would from their intelligence and station most aspire to make the laws do here recoil the farthest from that degradation. So these people who are legislators, who are going to frame the legislation for their countrymen, they are getting embroiled in low kind of fights and scrambling. But at the same time, he is telling that he is not discounting that all the legislators are like that. There are also people, some men of high character and great abilities. There are great people. There are good people. There are people of integrity, decency, and all these things that a legislator needs. And he is telling that these people and their behavior in the House of Representatives made in him a great impression, increased admiration and respect. His admiration and respect was increased by looking at their conduct in the House of Representatives. And he describes them how Americans in strong and generous impulse, and they shall as well represent the honor and wisdom of their country at home as the distinguished gentleman who is now its minister at the British court. He is telling that these people already their names, their honor are spread in Europe, and by meeting them in physical sense, he finds himself to be honored. But he finds that the Senate is a dignified and decorous body, and its proceedings are conducted with much gravity and order. So, in comparison to the House of Representatives, the Senate, which is the senior house, which is the upper house, it is a much dignified and decorous body, and it had conducted its proceedings with gravity and order. And he finds that these people, they are also listening to each other's speech very attentively, which if he compares it with the House of Lords in Britain, he finds that sometimes this American Senate is conducting its meetings more in dignified manner, more seriousness, with more seriousness. But he comes back again to criticize, again to satirize that the floor of the Senate, which is carpeted, is again suffering from that cultural habit of the Americans, the masticating of the tobaccos, chewing the tobacco and spitting anywhere. And he is making a very wry comment that even if you have dropped your purse there, if they happen to drop anything, though it be their purse, not to pick it up with an ungloved hand on any account. So, in a dignified manner, he is criticizing, he is satirizing this behavior on the part of the senators, that though it is a dignified house, though they are conducting themselves in dignified manner, but the cultural behavior of that time in America is spoiling both the atmosphere and their conduct. And he is narrating once again about that habit of the Americans, that how some are very old chewers, but still they are bad marksmen, so they are spitting here and there, and the whole place is very dirty from that point of view. And he is telling that what would have happened to the people who are in charge of cleaning this place. They must be doing a lot of labor for that. And then he is coming to the other structures in Washington. Already he told about the patent office, the post office. So he is now telling the patent office at Washington furnishes an extraordinary example of American enterprise and ingenuity. He praises the patent office as an example of American enterprise and ingenuity. For the immense number of models it contains are the accumulated inventions of only 5 years. It was only 5 years old, this building, but within 5 years it had collected so much of models around to show from different parts of the world as well as from their country, that Dickens was much impressed by it. The elegant structure in which they are arranged is one of design rather than execution, for there is but one side erected out of four. And he is telling that things are arranged in a design, not execution. The things, the objects that are kept in the patent office, they are not for demonstration, not for execution, but only for exhibition. And secondly, he is telling the post office is a very compact and very beautiful building. In one of the departments, among collection of rare and curious articles, are deposited the presents which have been made from time to time to American ambassadors at foreign courts. And the post office is an elegant office. And one part of this post office is dedicated to the collection of the presents, gifts given to the American ambassadors in different parts of the world. And these American ambassadors, they have brought these gifts and deposited here. Some critics say that Dickens is critical about the ambassadors accepting the gift, but no. The actual intention of Dickens was to show the honesty, the integrity of American ambassadors. That how they have deposited their gifts which they had received both in the names of their country as well as personal level, they have deposited here for their countrymen because they were in the national duty. So whatever they received from the foreign countries, they have deposited here. And among them, there are many articles, and he is describing that even from a small snuff box to a richly mounted sword, everything was there. So it reflects on the integrity and honesty of the American ambassadors. Then he visits a Jesuit college at Georgetown, and he finds its landscape very beautiful with the Potomac River and its picturesque site. And he is making a comparison between Washington, which looks comparatively desolate, than this place. And then he visits the president's mansion. And what is his comment about the president's mansion? The president's mansion is more like an English clubhouse. So people may take it in a negative manner as a criticism, but actually it is not the criticism on part of Dickens if we know Dickens properly. Dickens was a champion of the poor, the deprived. He was always critical of the people who show off. He was not critical of the rich people in general, but he was critical of the rich people who were selfish and exhibitionists. So he is rather praising, I will say, he is rather praising that American president's mansion is more like an English clubhouse. It is not having all those fanfare, all those decorations and everything that the English mansions of prime minister at that time was having. And he found there, when he visited there on the ground floor, many people have gathered there, from the farmers to so many different type of people visiting there. And he found that people were showing to their mates different aspects of the president's mansion. And he discovered one good quality here among the people of America, that they are behaving in that presidential mansion as if they are the owner of this. It is their own national property, which is a different characteristics that he witnessed. And he found the greater portion of these assemblies were rather asserting their supremacy than doing anything else. They have come here to show their supremacy, that we are Americans. We are here in the palace of American president, and it is our place. And then he was taken into the president's chamber, and he finds that the president's chamber, which was a very small chamber in comparison to the drawing room, and all these rooms, they were not so much decorated or formal. And he found the president sitting at a business-like table covered with papers. Sat the president himself, the president of that time, John Tyler, who was the 10th president of America. He was sitting there in a business-like table, which is covered with papers, and he's sitting there. So that was the simplicity of the American president, which surprises Dickens. Because Dickens had that impression that America is so rich a country, and it is a new nation with new buildings, so it must be very decorated, formal. But he finds it is an informal atmosphere. And how the president looks? He looked somewhat worn and anxious, and well, he might be at war with everybody, but the expression of his face was mild and pleasant. Because John Tyler was the vice president, and he became the president after the demise of the president. But he was not liked by many people. So he was finding antagonism from all quarters. Therefore, he is a worn out man. But the moment Dickens met him, he found himself to be giving the expression of mildness and pleasantness. And I thought that in his whole carriage and demeanor, he becomes his station singularly well. So Dickens finds him a good fellow, a proper man, who is sitting there dispensing his duty as the president of such a big and powerful country, but with the reality about himself very much reflected in his expression. And he is also talking about some new aspects of American assemblies. He is telling it was on the occasion of one of those general assemblies which are held on certain nights between the hours of 9 and 12 o'clock. So, general assemblies were held between 9 and 12 o'clock in the night, which were called levees. It is called as levees in America. And then he is talking about his visit to the American president's place several times during his stay there, and with his wife also. The suite of rooms on the ground floor were lighted up, and a military band was playing in the hall. In the smaller drawing room, the center of circle of company, were the president and his daughter-in-law. So just before his departure from Washington, he was given the invitation. And Dickens is also a bit critical that he was not invited during his stay, which was around 2 weeks. But just before his departure from Washington, he was invited. He went there with his wife, and he found that there was the music, the band was playing. And in the smaller drawing room, the center of circle of company were president and his daughter-in-law. In the president's office, president and his daughter-in-law, who was a very interesting, graceful, and accomplished lady. They were there. And he is describing the great drawing room, which I have already mentioned, and the other chambers on the ground floor were crowded to excess. The company was not, in our sense of the term, select. Another aspect of the American life he is choosing to praise. That was, here, unlike Britain, people who are invited by the president are not selected. Rather, it is a cross section of the society who are present, who could make it to the president's palace. And the decorum and propriety of behavior which prevailed were unbroken by any rude or disagreeable incident. But he finds, though so many people have gathered from across the society, but there was not a single rude behavior, not a single disagreeable incident. So he was very much surprised that how the same American people whom he is finding asserting their superiority somewhere or some other types of behavior that he didn't like, but here he finds that how smoothly they are there in the presidential party without disturbing each other, without being rude, without being disagreeable with each other. And what more he found? He found that there was something to be praised about these people, that these visitors to whatever their station were not without some refinement of taste and appreciation of intellectual gifts. He finds that these people, they may be coming from the lowest levels of the society, the ordinary farmers, but still they are refined in their taste for appreciating intellect and appreciating the intellectual gifts. So, on that night, he found one of his American friends, means the writer, American writer Washington Irving, being invited there and being eulogized for his achievements all over the world, for his intellectual achievements. So, he is telling that few public men would have been so earnestly, devotedly, and affectionately caressed as Washington Irving, he found. And he felt very proud for his friend Washington Irving. And he also felt that American crowd are really, the American people are really worthy of being appreciated for their refinement and their appreciation of the intellectual gift and their gratitude. And another aspect also he praises about the American people. When he went to that president's mansion and their cart, it was quite crowded. People were moving and the carts were going, and he found there was no policeman, but no incident took place. Everything was moving very smoothly. Each and every cart was going in a proper manner. The people, the guests from the carts, they were being received and the carts were being hosted somewhere else. He was impressed by this sense of traffic, this sense of reception on the part of the American people. Without ceremony, without imposition of the rule, everything was conducted so smoothly, so harmoniously. So in this way, Dickens is finding his experience in Washington full of the binaries. He is impartially criticizing the defects or the lackings, and he is praising whatever he found to be appreciated. And finally, he is traveling towards the south to Richmond in Virginia, and he's telling that many people had warned him that he should not travel there by the rail coach, because these are the new developments of science at that time, and these are being introduced in America. So people were very much apprehensive about these new facilities, new transport means. But he said that he had determined to travel by the rail coach. And he traveled, and he met with no accident, he met with no incident on the way, and he praises the ingenious, adventurous spirit of the Americans. So, this travelogue, if we look at it, we will find that it is a very balanced, a very smooth and intellectual narrative. He is using satire, he is using humor of different types, he is using his ability to characterize different characters he came across, characterize the American people. So it is a wonderful travelogue. So Dickens as a novelist, if he is successful as a travel writer also, he is excellent. And we have to analyze his language. His language may not be very simple, but he expresses in a very condensed manner what he feels, what he realizes or experiences, and he narrates everything in a sequential manner, but sometimes going back to some past incidents and relating the present with the past. And through comparison, in a comparing mode with Britain or other European habits, he is also vividly bringing out before the reader his American experiences. I think you people will go through it exhaustively, and you will be able to do justice to the questions from this paper. The questions can be asked about the Dickens as a travel writer, and the question can also be about Dickens's impression about American people, or Dickens's impression about American legislators and president. So these type of questions are expected from this particular essay. I hope you will be benefited from this discussion, and that will make me grateful. Thank you.